The rain lashed against the high-rise window of Dr. Elena Vance's Seattle apartment, mirroring the storm brewing in her gut. 20 years, 2 decades spent chasing whispers in the blood, patterns in the chaos, a subtle tremor before the pandemic earthquake. And now, staring at the glowing screen displaying the latest global morbidity reports, the tremor she'd predicted, and been ignored about, was undeniable. Vitae Syndrome, the name tasted like ash. Elena wasn't some crystal ball gazer. Her prophecies were forged in petri dishes, coded in genomes, whispered by anomalous data points in sprawling health databases. She'd cut her teeth during the early, terrifying days of SARS, recognizing patterns others missed. She'd predicted the zoonotic jump of H5N1 strains with unsettling accuracy years before outbreaks. Her book, The Fractal Pathogen, detailing the nonlinear, interconnected nature of emerging diseases in a globalized world, was a cult classic among epidemiologists, but dismissed as alarmist fiction by the mainstream. Too abstract, they said. Where's the smoking gun virus, Elena? Vitae Syndrome hadn't started with a gunshot, it began with a sign. A gradual, pervasive fatigue unlike anything in the textbooks. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of chronic fatigue, nor the fevered depletion of infection. This was a leeching. Patients described it as feeling their vitality slowly draining away, cell by cell. Accompanying it was a subtle, universal symptom, a premature, rapid graying and thinning of hair, starting at the temples and crown, progressing far faster than natural aging. Blood tests showed nothing conclusively abnormal, maybe slightly elevated inflammatory markers, a dip in certain micronutrients easily explained away by modern diets. Doctors shrug, stress, burnout, the modern condition. But Elena had seen the whispers years ago. Flashback to 5 years ago. CDC headquarters, Atlanta. The fluorescent lights hummed with bureaucratic indifference. Elena stood before the Emerging Pathogens Review Board, her presentation crisp, her voice steady despite the frustration simmering beneath. And the correlation, in just statistical noise. She insisted, laser pointer highlighting clusters on a global map. Look at Reykjavik, Iceland. Look at Kyoto, Japan. Look at Portland, Oregon. Disparate locations. No shared travel histories initially connecting these early cases, but they all share this specific, anomalous biomarker signature in their epigenetic data, a pattern of methylation I've dubbed pattern Theta. It correlates 0.92 with the self-reported, otherwise medically unexplained fatigue and accelerated hair depigmentation. Dr. Robert Henderson, a veteran virologist leaning back in his chair, steepled his fingers. Pattern Theta, Elena. Interesting, but correlation isn't causation. Epigenetics is a vast, murky field. What triggers this pattern? A virus, a prion, environmental toxin. That's the critical unknown, Robert, Elena conceded. But the pattern is there, it's spreading, slowly, silently. These aren't isolated hypochondriacs, we're seeing clusters in specific demographics. High-achieving professionals aged 35 to 55, predominantly in tech hubs, finance centers, high-stress knowledge economies. The very people driving our interconnected world, another board member, Dr. Anita Chen, frowned. So, stress-induced epigenetic changes. Hardly a novel disease, Elena, more a societal malaise. Where's the pathogen? Where's the vector? Without a mechanism, without a tangible threat, we can't justify diverting resources from known killers like influenza or antibiotic resistance. Elena leaned forward, her knuckles wide on the table. That's the point. This isn't fitting the old models. This isn't Ebola bursting from the jungle. This is insidious. Think of it as a lifestyle pathogen. What if our hyper-connected, high-pressure, nutrient-poor, sleep-deprived modern existence is just unhealthy, but is actively rewriting our biology in a way that primes us for something new? Pattern Theta isn't the disease itself. It's the dry tinder. I'm predicting the spark is coming. Something will exploit this vulnerability. Something we will and see until it's everywhere, because we were not looking for this kind of fire. The silence was thick. Henderson sighed. Elena, your track record is impressive, but it's speculative. It's sociology dressed as epidemiology. Bring us a virus. Bring us a bacterium. Bring us something we can fight with a vaccine or an antibiotic. Until then, the board's position is one of watchful waiting. Monitor pattern Theta. Sure, but no dedicated task force. No alerts. The dismissal stung. It was the Cassandra complex all over again. See the future. Shout the warning. Be labeled mad. Present day, the rain streaked the window like tears. Elena's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling data streams from public health agencies, anonymized electronic health records accessed through back channels she'd cultivated over years, and even niche wellness forums where desperate people shared symptoms doctors dismissed. The clusters she'd identified 5 years ago had exploded. Reykjavik, Kyoto, Portland, now joined by Berlin, Singapore, Austin, Toronto. The fatigue leeching and rapid graying were rampant within the original demographic, but it was spreading. Younger adults, some retirees, and then, 6 months ago, the whispers had changed. The spark had landed. Subtle cognitive declines began appearing. Not dementia, but a fogginess, a difficulty concentrating, a slowing of complex thought processes, particularly devastating for the knowledge workers first affected. Minor. Recurrent infections lingered longer. Wounds healed slower, and then came the tremors. Fine, almost imperceptible tremors in the hands, a slight unsteadiness in gait. Neurologists found nothing conclusive. Autoimmune panels were messy, but inconclusive. It defied easy categorization. Vitae Syndrome. The name emerged from a desperate online community. Vitae Life. Syndrome, a collection of symptoms. The stealing of life. Elena had connected the dots instantly. Pattern Theta was the vulnerability, but what was the trigger? The pathogen. She'd spent years searching, running complex algorithms on global data, looking for correlations beyond the obvious. Then, a week ago, she found it, not in a virus, but in a product ubiquitous in the lives of the first victims. NexLife. It wasn't a drug. It was a subscription service. The ultimate bio-enhancement platform, marketed aggressively to the stressed, the ambitious, the aging who wanted an edge. It combined personalized nootropic blends, tailored micronutrient packets, sleep optimization protocols delivered via a sleek wrist monitor, and stress management biofeedback apps. It promised peak performance, longevity, optimized vitality. It was wildly popular, especially in the tech and finance sectors. Its user base perfectly overlapped with the initial Vitae Syndrome clusters. Elena had hacked into NexLife's anonymized aggregate user health data, a significant ethical line crossed, justified by the looming catastrophe. The correlation was terrifying. Users who had subscribed for over 18 months showed a 300% higher incidence of pattern Theta compared to non-users in the same demographic. And among those with pattern Theta, the progression to full Vitae Syndrome symptoms was significantly faster and more severe. It wasn't the nootropics. It wasn't the vitamins. She'd tested those components independently. It was the synergy. It was the proprietary algorithm driving the entire system. The constant monitoring, the relentless biofeedback, the subtle, algorithmically timed microdoses and stimuli designed to override the body's natural rhythms and push it into a perpetual, artificial state of optimal performance. It was hacking the human operating system without understanding the underlying, fractal complexity of its code. It was creating the perfect biochemical and neurological environment for pattern Theta to flourish and mutate into Vitae Syndrome. The subscription service wasn't enhancing life. It was subtly, insidiously reprogramming it for failure. The spark wasn't a germ, it was an algorithm. The vector wasn't a mosquito, it was a business model. Present day, later Elena stood before a different kind of board. Not government bureaucrats, but investors and executives in the sleek, Minimalist headquarters of NexLife Corporation. Julian Thorne, the charismatic, silver-tongued CEO, listened with a polite, condescending smile as she presented her findings. She laid it out, the data, the correlations, the terrifying progression from pattern Theta to Vitae Syndrome linked inextricably to prolonged NexLife use. Dr. Vance, Thorne said smoothly, steepling his fingers in an unsettling echo of Henderson years before. Your passion is evident, but correlation, as you well know, is not causation. NexLife has improved the lives of millions. Our data shows enhanced cognitive function, better sleep metrics, reduced subjective stress. What you call pattern Theta, an unvalidated biomarker, I might add, and this Vitae Syndrome, a collection of vague symptoms readily explained by modern life pressures, are unfortunate coincidences. Perhaps your methodology, he didn't finish. The implication hung in the air. You're seeing ghosts. You're desperate to be relevant. Elena didn't flinch. I have blood samples. I have longitudinal health data. I have the algorithm's output logs cross-referenced with user symptom unset. The evidence is mounting, Mr. Thorne. Exponentially, people are dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but they are fading. Their vitality is being extinguished, and NexLife is the common denominator creating the vulnerability that allows this syndrome to take hold. You built the tinderbox. Vitae is the fire. Thorne's smile hardened. Strong accusations. Doctor, backed, it seems, by illegally obtained data. NexLife adheres to the highest ethical and safety standards. Our independent review boards find no such link. We are pioneers in human optimization. What you perceive as a threat is merely the friction of progress. The human body adapting. He stood. This meeting is over. I suggest you focus on real diseases, Dr. Vance. Leave innovation to us. Present day. 1 month later, Elena sat in a small, independent lab funded by a terrified, anonymous tech billionaire whose inner circle had been decimated by Vitae. The storm outside had abated, leaving a cold, clear night. Reports flooded in. Vitae Syndrome was no longer deniable. Major news networks finally ran features, focusing on the tragic human stories, the brilliant coder who couldn't concentrate, the surgeon whose hands trembled, the vibrant mother fading into a gray, exhausted ghost. The rapid graying became its visual hallmark. The term the graying entered the lexicon. The link to NexLife was still officially contested, buried under corporate obfuscation, legal threats, and the sheer complexity of proving algorithmic causation. But whispers were becoming shouts. Class action lawsuits were brewing. A terrified public was demanding answers. Elena looked at the latest genomic analysis on her screen. Pattern Theta was evolving. New, more aggressive variants were emerging in Vitae patients. The syndrome was learning, adapting. The initial slow leech was accelerating in some. Neurological symptoms were worsening. Her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from a contact deep within the CDC. It contained a preliminary report, suspected cases exhibiting Vitae-like symptoms. The fatigue, the graying, the cognitive fog were appearing in populations with no NexLife exposure. Remote villages in Southeast Asia, subsistence farmers in Africa, populations living far from the optimized stress of the knowledge economy. Elena's blood ran cold. This was the phase shift she'd feared. The fire, initially ignited in the dry tinder NexLife had helped create, was finding other fuel. It was jumping the fence. Vitae Syndrome, born from the unintended consequences of humanity's frantic push against its own biological limits in a specific context, was evolving into something self-sustaining, something truly novel, something capable of spreading beyond its original, man-made vulnerability. The prophecy hadn't just been about the disease. It had been about the conditions that would birth it and allow it to flourish. She'd seen the vulnerability, pattern Theta, years ago. She'd predicted something would exploit it. She just hadn't imagined the exploit would be $1 billion wellness subscription. And now, the genie was out of the bottle, evolving, spreading. She saved the data, her fingers trembling slightly, a tremor not from Vitae, but from the crushing weight of being right. The fight would shift now, from proving the link to NexLife, to understanding this new, independent phase of Vitae, to finding a way to dampen pattern Theta, to shore up the fundamental vitality the syndrome consumed, to battling a disease born not from a jungle or a lab leak, but from the unintended, fractal consequences of how modern humanity chose to live, pushing itself towards an artificial peak that turned out to be the edge of a cliff. Elena Vance, the prophet of pathogens no one wanted to hear, took a deep breath. The quiet before the storm was over. The real storm, the global battle against a disease that mirrored humanity's hidden frailties in the age of optimization, had just begun. She opened a new file. The title blinked on the screen: Project Phoenix, Rebuilding Vitality from the Ashes of Vitae. The work, the true work fueled by grim prophecy, started now. Outside, the city lights glittered, unaware of the silent leeching within its heart, and the even more terrifying shadow spreading beyond. The prediction had been the easy part. Surviving its fulfillment would be the real test. She reached for her coffee, her hands steady now, her eyes fixed on the data, already searching for the next whisper, the next tremor in the fragile web of life. The future, as always, was a story still being written, and Elena Vance was determined to change its ending.